standing up and fighting for a living wage of at least $15 an hour and the right to have a union. They are the young people taking on the fossil fuel industry and demanding policies that transform our energy system and protect our planet from the ravages of climate change. They are women who refuse to give control of their bodies to local, state, or federal politicians. They are people of color and their allies demanding an end to systemic racism and massive racial inequities that exist throughout our society. They are immigrants and their allies fighting to end the demonization of undocumented people and for comprehensive immigration reform. Now, when we talk about oligarchy, let us be clear about what we mean. Right now, in the United States of America, 3 families control more wealth than the bottom half of our country, some 160 million Americans. The top 1% own more wealth than the bottom 92%. And 49% of all new income generated today goes to the top 1%. In fact, income and wealth inequality today is greater in the United States than in any time since the 1920s. And when we talk about oligarchy, it is not just that the very rich are getting much richer. It is that tens of millions of working class people in the wealthiest country on earth are suffering under incredible economic hardship, desperately trying to survive. Today, nearly 40 million Americans live in poverty, and tonight, some 500,000 Americans, including many veterans, will be sleeping out on the streets. About half of our country lives paycheck to paycheck, as tens of millions of our people are an accident, a divorce, a sickness, or a layoff away from economic devastation. While many public schools throughout the country lack the resources to adequately educate our young people, we are the most heavily incarcerated nation on earth. After decades of policies that have encouraged and subsidized unbridled corporate greed, we now have an economy that is fundamentally broken and grotesquely unfair. Even while macroeconomic numbers like GDP, the stock market, and the unemployment rate are strong, millions of middle-class and working-class people struggle to keep their heads above water, while at the same time, the billionaire class consumes the lion's share of the wealth that we are collectively creating as a nation. In the midst of a so-called booming economy, real wages for the average worker have barely risen at all, and despite an explosion in technology and worker productivity, the average wage of the American worker in real dollars is no higher than it was 46 years ago, and millions of people in our country today are forced to work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. And here is something quite incredible that tells you all that you need to know about the results of unfettered capitalism. All of us want to live long, happy, and productive lives. But in America today, the very rich live, on average, 15 years longer than the poorest Americans. In 2014, for example, in McDowell County, West Virginia, one of the poorest counties in the nation, life expectancy for men was 64 years. In Fairfax County, Virginia, a wealthy county, just 350 miles away, life expectancy for men was nearly 82 years, an 18-year differential. The life expectancy gap for women in the two counties was 12 years. In other words, the issue of unfettered capitalism is not just an academic debate. Poverty, economic distress, and despair are life-threatening issues for millions of working people in this country. While the rich get richer, they live longer lives. While poor and working families struggle economically and often lack adequate health care, their life expectancy is declining for the first time in modern American history. Taken together, the American dream of upward mobility is in peril. In fact, if we don't turn things around, our younger generation will, for the first time in living memory, have a lower standard of living than their parents. And that is not acceptable. Globally, the situation is even more shocking. With most of the world's wealth concentrated among a very few, while billions of people have almost nothing. Today, the world's richest 26 billionaires, 26, now own as much wealth as the poorest 3.8 billion people on the planet, half of the world's population. But the struggle we are facing today is not just economic. Across the globe, the movement toward oligarchy runs parallel to the growth of authoritarian regimes, like Putin in Russia, Xi in China, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Viktor Orban in Hungary, among others. These leaders meld corporatist economics with xenophobia and authoritarianism. They redirect popular anger about inequality and declining economic conditions into violent rage against minorities, whether they are immigrants, racial minorities, religious minorities, or the LGBT community. And to suppress dissent, they are cracking down on democracy and human rights. In the United States, of course, we have our own version of this movement, which is being led by President Trump and many of his Republican allies who are attempting to divide our country up and attack these very same communities. How sad it is that President Trump sees these authoritarian leaders as friends and allies. The authoritarian playbook, by the way, is not new. The challenge we confront today as a nation and as a world is in many ways not different from the one we faced a little less than a century ago during and after the Great Depression of the 1930s. Then as now, deeply rooted and seemingly intractable economic and social disparities led to the rise of right-wing nationalist forces all over the world. In Europe, the anger and despair was ultimately harnessed by authoritarian demagogues who fused corporatism, nationalism, racism, and xenophobia into a political movement that amassed totalitarian power, destroyed democracy, and ultimately murdered millions of people, including members of my own family. But we must remember that those were not the only places where dark forces tried to rise up and capture power. Today, we are all rightly repulsed by the sight of neo-Nazis and Klansmen openly marching in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we are horrified by houses of worship being shot up by right-wing terrorists. But on February 20th, 1939, over 20,000 Nazis held a mass rally, not in Berlin, not in Rome, but in Madison Square Garden, in front of a 30-foot banner of George Washington bordered with swastikas in New York City. New York City. But back then, those American extremists could not replicate the success of their authoritarian brethren across the ocean, because we in the United States, thank God, made a different choice than Europe did in responding to the era's social and economic crises. We rejected the ideology of Mussolini and Hitler, and we instead embraced the bold and visionary leadership of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, then the leader of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Together with organized labor, leaders in the African-American community, and progressives inside and outside the Democratic Party, Roosevelt led a transformation of the American government and the American economy. Like today, the quest for transformative change was opposed by big business, by Wall Street, by the political establishment, by the Republican Party, and by the conservative wing of FDR's own Democratic Party. And he faced the same scare tactics then that we experience today: red baiting, xenophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism. In a famous 1936 campaign speech, Roosevelt stated, and I quote, "We had to struggle with the old enemies of peace: business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, war profiteering." They had begun to consider the government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. We know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. And Roosevelt concluded, and I quote, "Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred." That was FDR in 1936. Now, although it does sound, I must say it does sound a little contemporary, doesn't it? Despite that opposition, by rallying the American people, FDR and his progressive coalition created the New Deal, won 4 terms, and created an economy that worked for all and not just the few. Today, New Deal initiatives like Social Security, unemployment compensation, the right to form a union, the minimum wage, protection for farmers, regulation of Wall Street, and massive infrastructure improvements are considered pillars of American society. But while he stood up for the working families of our country, we can never forget that President Roosevelt was reviled by the oligarchs of his time, who berated these extremely popular programs as socialism. Similarly, in the 1960s, when President Lyndon Johnson brought about Medicare, Medicaid, and other extremely popular and important programs, he was also viciously attacked by the ruling class of this country. And here is the point. It is no exaggeration to state that not only did FDR's agenda improve the lives of millions of Americans, but the New Deal was enormously popular politically and helped defeat far-right extremism. For a time. Today, America and the world are once again moving toward authoritarianism, and the same right-wing forces of oligarchy, corporatism, nationalism, racism, and xenophobia are on the march, pushing us to make the apocalyptically wrong choice that Europe made in the last century. Today, we now see a handful of billionaires with unprecedented wealth and power. We see huge private monopolies operating outside of any real democratic oversight and often subsidized by taxpayers, with the power to control almost every aspect of our lives. They are the profit-taking gatekeepers of our healthcare, our technology, our finance system, our food supply, and almost all of the other basic necessities of life. And let us name them. They are Wall Street, the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex, the prison-industrial complex, and giant agribusiness. They are the entities with unlimited wealth who surround our nation's capital with thousands of well-paid lobbyists who, to a very significant degree, write the laws that we live under. Today, we have a demagogue in the White House who, for cheap political gain, is attempting to deflect the attention of the American people away from the real crises that we face, and instead is doing what demagogues always do, and that is to divide people up and legislate hatred. This is a president.
All right, if you want to keep listening in to Senator Bernie Sanders, you can keep watching at cbsnews.com/Sanders. But for now, we're going to turn to the Rose Garden at the White House, where President Trump is set to take questions alongside the president of Poland. Let's listen in.
Poland back to the White House. They become friends. We last hosted them in Washington in September, and it's wonderful to see you both again. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great honor. Since our last meeting, the unbreakable bonds between the United States and Poland have grown even closer. This year, as our nations mark 100 years of diplomatic relations, the U.S. Polish alliance is stronger by far than ever before. Earlier today, President Duda and I signed a joint declaration affirming the significant defense cooperation between our nations, and as the declaration makes very clear, the United States and Poland are not only bound by a strategic partnership, but by deep common values, shared goals, and a very strong and abiding friendship. Our people are united by the enduring ties of civilization, culture, and history. We respect the rule of law, revere individual rights, and prize our timeless traditions. We embrace country, faith, family, and freedom. Over the past century, brave American and Polish patriots have repeatedly stood together to defend our sovereignty, our liberty, and our noble way of life. When I was last in Poland, I was very proud to stand among veterans of the Warsaw Uprising and recall their incredible courage in the face of Nazi tyranny. Today, we honor the sacrifices of all those who came before by doing our part to safeguard our independence and strengthen the incredible U.S.-Polish alliance. As stated in the joint declaration, the United States and Poland continue to enhance our security cooperation. Poland will still provide basing and infrastructure to support military presence of about 1,000 American troops. The Polish government will build these projects at no cost to the United States. The Polish government will pay for this. We thank President Duda and the people of Poland for their partnership in advancing our common security. Poland's burden sharing also extends to the NATO alliance, where it is among 8 NATO allies, including the United States, currently meeting the minimum 2% of GDP. That's for defense spending. And Poland's there, and you've been there from a very early date, and we appreciate that very much. And we've been there also. There's been a total of 8 out of 28. The rest are coming along because nations, at my urging, have paid more than $100 billion more toward the NATO defense. Last month, I was very pleased that Poland announced the intent to purchase 32 American-made F-35 fighter aircraft like you just saw. Moments ago, we witnessed that impressive flyover of this cutting-edge F-35 as it flew over the White House and actually came to a pretty close to a halt over the White House. I was saying, what's wrong with that plane? It's not going very fast. But it's an incredible thing when you can do that. The plane can land dead straight, and it's one of the few in the world that can do that. Considered to be the greatest fighter jet in the world. I applaud President Duda for its efforts to strengthen and modernize Poland's defenses. I also want to congratulate Poland for its progress on meeting U.S. criteria for entry into the visa waiver program. Today, our country signed a Preventing and Combating Serious Crimes Agreement, a significant and necessary step for Poland's entry into the program. Though we still have some work to do, we hope to welcome Poland into the visa waiver program very soon, and that's a very big deal. Both of our nations understand that immigration security is national security. In our meeting, President Duda and I discussed the vital issue of energy. Reliance on a single foreign supplier of energy leaves nations totally vulnerable to coercion and extortion. For this reason, we support Poland's construction of the Baltic pipeline, which will help European countries diversify their energy sources. It's desperately needed, and that's the way to go. During the past year, Poland has also signed approximately $25 billion worth of new contracts with U.S. firms to buy more than 6 billion cubic meters of U.S. liquefied natural gas. Today, our nations just signed another contract for an additional 2 billion cubic meters worth approximately $8 billion. So between the planes and the liquefied natural gas and many other things that Poland is doing, which is doing very well, because Poland is doing very, very well, we appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Our countries also signed an agreement to expand U.S.-Polish civil nuclear cooperation, which will likewise advance Poland's energy and security and deepen our bilateral commercial ties. Economic relations between the U.S. and Poland are thriving. We're committed to further expanding commerce based on fairness and reciprocity, perhaps my favorite word, across many critical areas from defense and diplomacy to energy and economics. The alliance between the United States and Poland is reaching extraordinary new heights in 2019. Our longstanding partnership demonstrates the enormous possibilities for the world when two strong and independent nations unite in common purpose and in common cause. President Duda, it's an honor to have you with us. And Mrs. Duda, thank you very much for being here. We usher in a very exciting new era in U.S. Polish alliance. It's a very special alliance with very special people. We build a future of promise and prosperity for the American and the Polish people. And again, our relationship is an extraordinary one, and it's going to remain that for a long, long time. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you.
Wielce szanowny panie.
Distinguished Mr. President, a wonderful First Lady of the United States of America, distinguished ministers, all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, together with my wife, we would like to thank you very much, Mr. President Donald Trump. Thank you also to the First Lady, Melania Trump, for this invitation to Washington. Thank you for this possibility of holding another within the last 10 months official visit to the United States here at the White House. This clearly demonstrates how close and how good contacts are today between Poland and the United States. Mr. President, all of us hope that you will visit us in Poland in September and that we will be able together to commemorate the memory of all those who fell and who perished during the Second World War, which started on the 1st of September 1939 in Poland through the attack of Nazi Germans on our country. And soon, unfortunately, our country vanished from the map of Europe after the attack of the Soviet Union against Poland, together with Nazi Germany. That is our history. It's a very difficult one. And today, we firmly believe that the true ally of Poland, but also a true ally of a free Europe, is precisely the United States of America, who helped that very Europe in such a huge way to win the Second World War and later to establish an independent, sovereign, and free world, which later turned into the European Union. It exists until this day, and thanks God, also thanks to the support of the United States, through the support of subsequent presidents since 1989, thanks to the great movement of solidarity, thanks to the great determination of the Polish nation. Also, we are part of the free world. Also, Poland, which liberated itself from behind the Iron Curtain, which later led to the collapse of the Iron Curtain through the votes of the people cast in elections in 1989. In those elections, people said no to the communists. Also, Poland can develop today as an independent and truly sovereign country, a country which wants to build the European community, and a country which also wants to build the Euro-Atlantic community. In our understanding, this is an absolutely key element of peace and good cooperation across the globe. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you that, for sure, you are among those presidents of the United States who understand how it works perfectly. You understand that when the U.S. looks at Europe, when it looks at the security of the European states, it plays a key role for the peace around the globe. It is of key importance for the peaceful development of democratic states and democratic communities. Thank you, Mr. President, for this extreme kindness towards Poland and perfect understanding of Polish matters, which you showed to us in 2017 during your visit to Poland, during your memorable speech that you gave at the monument of the Warsaw Uprising, where so immensely important words for Polish people fell, which are of historic importance to our nation and to Europe. They showed what Poland means and who Poles are. Mr. President, thank you for uttering those words back then, and thank you also for this policy which is being implemented right now, which demonstrates that you are this kind of man and this kind of a politician who not only speaks, but to whom first and most important are the deeds. The most important are the deeds, and whenever You say, Mr. President, make America great again. It means make, not say. And this precisely is of crucial importance. Hence, the agreements that we're signing, hence two agreements between our two states concluded today, two memorandums of understanding, which we signed just a moment ago. One of them I signed personally concerning the security and military cooperation. As you mentioned, sir, there will be more American troops in Poland. This is going to be an enhanced cooperation. It's going to be an enduring presence, which hopefully will increase gradually in terms of the number of troops, but also in terms of infrastructure, which is very important. Thank you also for the decision to establish the division headquarters in Poland. This is of huge importance, not only to Poland, but also to our part of Europe, to Central Europe, to the Baltic states, and to all those to whom the enhanced forward presence was established of the United States and other NATO states along NATO's eastern flank. I'm deeply grateful for that. But thank you, Mr. President, also for the remaining agreements. Thank you for this agreement which talks about preventing and combating serious crimes. It moves us closer to a visa waiver program between Poland and the United States, which to you, Mr. President, and to me, and first and foremost to Poles, is so important, is of such a crucial importance. Thank you, Mr. President, also for excellent energy cooperation that we have in terms of LNG supplies. We talked about this in 2017 in Warsaw during our meeting, that gas from the United States should be delivered to Poland, and it is delivered, and we are signing more contracts. And gas tankers from the United States are coming to the port of Świnoujście today, and the gas from the United States has become a fact in Poland and in our part of Europe. Thank you, Mr. President, that there are going to be more supplies. I'm very happy about that, because to us it means diversification of sources of supplies. It also means the development of gas security. To us, it also means good business, just as I deeply believe is a good business for the United States of America. But thank you also for the agreement on cooperation in terms of nuclear energy used for civil purposes. I hope that together we will be able to implement this program with the benefit for environment protection, with the benefit for climate protection across the globe, and also for the development of the security of my homeland. Mr. President, I'm deeply grateful for this visit. I'm pleased that thanks to this presence, we're able to show the very good cooperation that we have between Poland as part of the European Union and the United States. And I firmly believe that thanks to your incredible view of the European matters and thanks to your understanding to our Polish matters and to the meanders of our history, this cooperation is going to develop better and better, first and foremost also with the benefit for the United States, whose interests you are representing, Mr. President, also understanding the rest of the world. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions. Emerald, OAN.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Earlier in the Oval Office, before you did your meeting with President Duda, you were quite critical of Germany as you talked about possibly moving troops from Germany to Poland. Do you think that doing a move like that will put pressure on Germany to meet their defense spending requirements?
No, I don't think so. I just will tell you very strongly that I think Germany is making a tremendous mistake by relying so heavily on the pipeline. And I think it's a tremendous mistake for Germany. But again, Germany's running their affairs, and they'll do just fine. But I was critical. I had been critical of it. It's a tremendous amount of their energy will be supplied by that pipeline. At the same time, having nothing to do with Germany, Poland said that we would like to build a facility, a great facility, and would like to have you come to that facility. So we're going to be there with a limited force, but we'll be there, and we appreciate Poland doing what they're doing. It's a great location. It's a tremendous plant, tremendous facility, and it's our honor to be there. Poland's been a tremendous friend of ours for a long time, and when Melania and I were there not so long ago, it was a very special day. I think it was a special day for Poland also, but it was a very special day for our country. So I appreciate that, and our relationship is just a very strong one.
And if I may, would you indulge me with one more question before I get to ask
go
President
ahead.
Duda our question? In more recent news, yesterday you revealed you got another letter from Kim Jong-un. And today we hear of a potential thawing of relations between South Korea and North Korea as Kim Jong-un sent his sister to South Korea. Now, could you give us an update on more of what it was in that letter? And is there a third summit in the works?
He just wrote me a very nice letter, unexpected, and someday you'll see what was in that letter. Someday you'll be reading about it, maybe in 100 years from now, maybe in 2 weeks, who knows. But it was a very nice letter. It was a very warm, very nice letter. I appreciated it. Okay?
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much.
And then, if I may, for President Duda,
Yes.
you said you were thankful for the commitment that the president made for more troops today, but you hinted that you would like to see more. Ultimately, what is the number of troops that you'd like to see in Poland, U.S. troops?
Szanowna Pani redaktor, to zawsze będzie.
Madam, this, of course, is always going to be the decision of the United States of America. This is going to be the decision of the United States of America.
Troops.
To zawsze będzie. To zawsze będzie.
It's always going to be up to the United States to decide how many troops will be sent to which allied nation. Of course, I know that this depends on the needs and on the real situation on the ground. Of course, we are very pleased that the U.S. troops are present by giving an evidence to the sustainability and strength of the alliance. And the U.S. soldiers are kindly treated in Poland. They are received as friends, and we are happy that they are serving in our country. We would like those bonds between Poland and the United States to become even tighter, and we are trying also to create the best possible conditions for American soldiers.
Zuzanna Falzman. Thank you very much, President Trump. Thank you very much, President Duda. I have questions to both of you, actually. President Trump, you plan to enhance U.S. military presence in Poland. Last year, you promised you would enhance military cooperation, training, intelligence, missile defense, and it's happening right now. People of Poland still remember your incredible speech in Warsaw. Why Poland is such an important ally for you?
I just have a very warm feeling for Poland. I always have. And it's now even beyond that because of the relationship which we've developed with your president and First Lady. And it's just, they're incredible people, hardworking, smart, very industrious people. And what they've done with the country over the last 5 years has been something that the world has watched and the world has marveled at. I've just liked Poland. So when the president came and he asked me whether or not we'd consider this, I said I will consider it. And now, because of his leadership, we're able to do that. And that's fine with me. That's great. Great people. And say hello.
So I understand we'll see you in September in Warsaw, correct?
We are looking very seriously at going back to Poland. And I don't know what the president has in store for us, but we're thinking about going back sometime in September. Yes.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Panie prezydencie.
The question to President Duda. Mr. President, so far we have been talking about a rotational presence of U.S. troops in our country. Right now we are talking about permanent or enduring presence. What does that mean in concrete terms? And when can we expect those additional U.S. troops to arrive? I understand it in the following way. President Donald Trump and myself are implementing a very calm but consistent policy in terms of security. The presence of the United States in Poland, the military presence, the presence of U.S. troops, which today is about 4,500 troops present on a permanent basis. In other words, it is a rotational presence, but it is back-to-back prisons. So there is no moment where there are no American troops in the territory of Poland. And today we signed a document on further cooperation, a joint declaration on defense cooperation regarding United States' force posture in the Republic of Poland. This is of a breakthrough character because it moves us to another era. So far we can say that the Americans were testing the situation in Poland, how it looks, how they feel. What about logistics, whether it is possible to stay in Poland and to successfully attain the goals and implement the tasks of defensive nature. I think that the commanders of U.S. Army are convinced that this is simply possible. And today, the document speaks about this enduring presence, the presence which is a fact and which will stay there. It is a rotational presence, yes, it is, because this is most beneficial from today's perspective to train soldiers through rotational presence. By having rotational presence, more soldiers can come to a country, be present there, look at the culture, at the condition in place in a given country. So this is beneficial for this broadly understood development of the armed forces. Therefore, this is an enduring presence. However, it is implementing this particular way, and we hope it's going to develop 1,000 troops mentioned by President Trump today, which is also the number stipulated in the agreement signed today, is very differentiated. It is not one single unit. We're talking about special operation forces. We are talking about logistics component. We are also talking about the already mentioned division headquarters. So there is a multitude of forms in which the United States is going to be gradually ever more present in our territory from the military standpoint. And this will encompass different fields of cooperation. So we're not talking about just one single beat, but we're talking about a more comprehensive cooperation. We're talking about logistics, health protection for soldiers, and a number of other elements happening. Please remember that right now there is this missile defense facility being built in Redzikowo. So talking about the elements of Polish-American cooperation, there are more and more of these elements, and the number is growing. I'm very happy with that. Thank you very much.
Let's see, who do I like? Nobody. That's the end. Go ahead. Yeah.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
I wasn't pointing to you, but you can go ahead. Here we go.
Pointing to.
I was actually pointing to my friend with that beautiful hat on, but that's okay.
All right.
You'll give up your question?
Follow-up question.
You'll give up your...
We can share it.
We'll share the question.
Okay, we'll share it.
Mr. President, you seem to suggest yesterday that you are essentially committing to not spying on North Korea. Is that what you meant? Were those comments interpreted accurately?
No, it's not what I meant. It's what I said, and that's. I think it's different than maybe your interpretation. I think we're going to do very well with North Korea over a period of time. I'm in no rush. The sanctions are on. We got our hostages back. Our remains are coming back. You saw the beautiful ceremony in Hawaii with Mike Pence. We're getting the remains back. There's been no nuclear testing whatsoever. They'd like to do something. I did get, as I said yesterday, a very nice letter from Chairman Kim. And I think we're doing very well. When I took over as president, I will tell you, it looked like it was going to be war with North Korea. You know that. Everybody knows that. And it was going to be quite brutal. A strong force. We're the strongest force in the world, but that's a strong force. And we started off a very rough relationship, and I think we have a very good relationship right now. So we'll see what happens. I'm in no rush. But there's been no nuclear testing whatsoever. And when I took over, it was nuclear testing all the time. And if you look back to the last 4, 5, 6 years, but really go back further than that, in all fairness to President Obama, go back 20 years, 15 years, it was really a very dangerous situation. I consider it to be different now. Now, I may change. And if I change, you will know it very quickly. I will be very quick to tell you exactly what's going on. I may change, but right now we have a good relationship, and I think probably better than we've had for maybe 25 years, maybe forever. They've been there a long time. The grandfather, the father, the son, and they've been there for a long time, and nobody's done anything except me. And so we'll see how it all turns out. I hope it turns out well for you and for everybody.
And I'll give my follow-up to Jeff very quickly. President Duda, thank you. Do you see Russia as an ally or an adversary?
Are you talking to me?
To President Duda.
Boy, was that a set-up question?
Ja bym bardzo chciał,
I would very much like Russia to be a friend of Poland because it is our great neighbor. It is a country much bigger than Poland, with a bigger potential than Poland in every single respect, except for one perhaps. I believe that we have got more courage in us, that we are more brave, more courageous, and are able to fight till the end, irrespective of everything. This is actually what we demonstrated in World War II at the Battle of Monte Cassino. We demonstrated that in the Warsaw Uprising. We demonstrated that in many other places around the globe, where Polish soldiers died to make sure that Poland is free after the Second World War. This, unfortunately, did not happen. We found ourselves under the Russian occupation. But even then, for almost 20 years after World War II, there was this anti-communist, anti-Soviet underground which fought against the Soviets, and those people were murdered. Today, we call them unbreakable soldiers. We commemorate their memory, although they were dug underground to make it impossible for anyone to find their remains, and so that they couldn't have graves built. So we were always fighting. We always knew how to defend ourselves. Nevertheless, history was brutal towards us. We never had a great friendship with Russia. Russia was always looking out to take our territory. It was a partitioner in Poland for 123 years. Poland did not exist because part of the territory was taken by Russia. Poles were deported to the east. Then came an aggression on the recently reborn Poland, which rose in 1918 from the ashes of the First World War. And in 1919, the Soviet Russia attacked Poland. It wanted to grab Poland's territory and bring communism to the west of Europe. It was us who stopped Soviets at Warsaw in 1920 by the bravery of Polish soldiers. We defeated them during a great battle, and then we chased them back to the east. And then they took their revenge on us in 1939 by attacking us together with Nazi Germany and murdering our officers in Katyń. So, madam, as you can see, this friendship is a very difficult one. Today, we are in the following situation. Russia attacked Georgia. Then in 2014, it attacked Ukraine. And these are facts. These are facts which belong to the recent history. We would like Russia to be our friend, but unfortunately, Russia, again, is showing its very unkind, unpleasant imperial face, and we do not want to be part of Russia's sphere of influence. And I am happy that today we can speak boldly, also in connection with the military presence of the U.S. and NATO in Poland, that we truly are, first and foremost, in terms of politics, part of the West, because we have always been part of the West in terms of culture. We have always been part of the West because it is from the West from which we adopted Christianity in 966, more than 1,000 years ago. And since that time, we have been part of the West of Europe. We have been part of the great Christian culture of Western Europe. But we have to stick to this West also in terms of politics, and this is what we want, and I firmly believe that this is the biggest desire of Polish people, to be part of the West also in terms of politics. Thank you that the United States is supporting us in this respect.
Excuse me.
And just to finish, I hope that Poland is going to have a great relationship with Russia. I think it's possible. I really do. I think because of what you've done and the strength, and maybe we help also because of what we're doing and doing for Poland. But I hope that Poland's going to have a great relationship with Russia. I hope we're going to have a great relationship with Russia. And by the way, China and many other countries. And we look forward to doing things on North Korea, just to go back to the original part of your question. And we'll see how that works out. I do want to say, though, we're in no hurry. The sanctions are on. China has actually been helping us quite a bit. And despite our trade differences right now, we thought we had a deal, and unfortunately they decided that they were going to change the deal, and they can't do that with me. But something's going to happen. I think it's going to be something very positive. But we think we're going to get along with a lot of countries that, frankly, did not respect us very much because they were ripping us off for many, many years, and they're not ripping us off anymore. Jeff?
Thank you, sir. Regarding China, what is your deadline, if you have one, for China to make progress on trade before you impose the tariffs on the other $325 billion in goods?
Well, we're going to be meeting President Xi and myself, and you know we have a very good relationship. But again, he's for China and I'm for the U.S. It's a big difference. And we thought we had a deal. We didn't have a deal, and I would never make something that would be less than what we already had. We had China opened up to trade. That's a big thing. They've never done that before. We had intellectual property theft taken care of, and taken care of beautifully. And all of a sudden, those things started to disappear at the end after they were fully negotiated. But that's, that's their decision. I think if they had it to do again, and in light of the fact that we have 25% on $250 billion of goods coming into the United States, and unlike a lot of countries, they subsidize those goods. We haven't had inflation. And, they keep saying that the American taxpayer is paying for it. No, very little. And what it really does mean is that a lot of those companies that are in China are going to be moving back to the U.S. You have car companies, General Motors as an example, that built plants in China. Well, that doesn't work out too well when you have the tariff wall up, because now they're going to have to get through that, and they can't really get through that. So maybe they'll start building plants in the United States instead. I think that we'll end up making a deal with China. We have a very good relationship, although it's a little bit testy right now, as you would expect. I think they really have to make a deal. A lot of companies are leaving China, as you know. It's in all the reports, and they're going to Vietnam and various other places, and they're also coming to the United States to make their product because they don't want to pay the tariff. And there is no tariff if you do it in the United States. People don't realize that. They say the tariff, but there is no tariff if you don't do it. If you just do exactly as I say, you bring your company back to the United States. And as far as Mexico is concerned, which was a very big topic yesterday, and now people are finding out that the reports that were written were totally false. We would never have had a deal with Mexico without imposing tariffs. Once the tariffs were imposed, and they've been trying to make this deal with Mexico for 20 years, 25 years. The older reporters, those great reporters with the very gray hair in the back, you know who I'm talking about. They know exactly what I'm talking about. You would have never made the deal with Mexico. We have a great deal with Mexico. I actually think we have a much better relationship right now with Mexico because they respect us again. But you would never have had that deal if I didn't impose the tariffs. And those tariffs were ready to go on Monday morning. And we made the deal on essentially Sunday night. And that extra little page of the deal that you saw, that brilliantly, I had gained such respect for you people when I held it up to the sunlight. And it was closed, and you were able to read it through the sunlight. That was not anticipated. But regardless, you knew enough of what it said, and I didn't do it on purpose. But we have a lot of strength in 45 days if we decide to use that strength. Maybe we will, and maybe we won't. But there's a lot of power right now on the border. And I will say this, Mexico is right now doing more for the United States on illegal immigration and all of the problems of crime and other problems on the border than the Democrats. We can solve our problem on the border in 15 minutes if the Democrats would sit down, straighten out asylum, which is a total mess, but very uncomplicated, straighten out asylum and get rid of the loopholes. It would take, Jeff, 15 minutes. Okay? Thank you.
But just my original question, sir, was, do you have a deadline for imposing the 325?
No, I have no deadline. My deadline is what's up here. We'll figure out the deadline.
Okay.
Nobody can quite figure it out.
And President Duda, if I could just throw on your way as well, you said in the Oval Office earlier that democracy in Poland was strong. Not all of your European Union counterparts agree with that. How is forcing Supreme Court justices to retire early consistent with democratic principles? And President Trump, is that something that you support?
No.
Szanowni Państwo, to bardzo skomplikowana sprawa.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very complex issue, and it's hard to answer this question because a lot of people in Western Europe, I think also in the U.S., do not fully understand this problem because they have not grown up in a country such as mine. I was born in 1972 in a Poland which was in the Russian sphere of influence, in which a career could be made only actually when somebody enrolled as member of a communist party and who followed this people's power, who was the supreme authority. And this is what was happening for many years. Although, as you know, ladies and gentlemen, a solidarity movement grew. People were imprisoned, people were tortured, people were killed during the martial law and after as well, be it openly or in a secret way. And this was the reality of Poland until 1989. And now imagine, ladies and gentlemen, that not so long ago, a few years ago, I was surprised to discover that in the Polish Supreme Court there is a whole group of justices who were issuing sentences as judges, members of the Communist Party before 1990, who were even passing sentences during the martial law, sentencing people to prisons based on the law of the communist martial law. And when I was asked whether the Supreme Court needs to be reformed, I said yes, if Poland is supposed to be a truly democratic, free and sovereign country, if it is supposed to be a country we want it to be for our children, for the generation who was born after 1989, then for God's sake, those people have to leave, they have to retire, and this is what we did. As a matter of fact, everything that we were doing was aimed at retiring those people. But as you can see, unfortunately, although 30 years have passed, they have got influence, the influence which they were building after 1989, where they assumed a new identity of an elite of a new state. So this influence is still strong. This is what I can say. And let me assure you of one thing, the freedom of speech is absolutely respected in Poland. Poland absolutely respects all constitutional standards, just as in the United States, the right to assemble, the right to the freedom of speech. There is free media in Poland. There is everything that is functioning in a normal democracy. One can announce what they think, one can demonstrate, one can say what they think. In Poland, people are not attacked during demonstrations, as it happens in other Western European countries. Police do not use truncheons or tear gas against people. People can speak their mind. They can express that they're not pleased with something. This is their right in democracy. Please ask Polish journalists, when was the last time? When was the last demonstration in Poland when some kind of tension happened? No, it didn't, because in Poland we respect the right to demonstrate and to express your concern, because we believe that this is one of the foundations of democracy. In Poland, there is absolutely free and just elections. All the standards are respected. So please, ladies and gentlemen, come to Poland and see Poland with your own eyes. Please do not repeat certain stereotypes that are repeated in the West. Poland today has got quite a conservative government. That is true. And this government has got certain standards of action. Not everybody subscribes to those standards, especially people of more leftist views. But this is the nature of democracy. So once you have got one side of the political scene in power, and then people make a different choice, and another side of the political stage comes to power. There is nothing extraordinary about that, and this is the change that is happening in Poland. But when somebody wins the elections, then they have the right to implement the program which they announced before the elections. Excuse me. However, realizing implementing the program which you presented in your election campaign is not only the right, but I think an obligation resting on a politician, and this is exactly what is happening in Poland. Marcin Wrona, TVN.
A question for both presidents. Mr. President, you said just a moment ago that Poland will join the visa waiver program soon. How soon?
We think fairly soon. We're doing very well with it. It's a complex situation, as you know, but we're getting very close. We allow very few countries to join, but Poland is one that we're thinking about allowing in. So we'll be making that decision over the next probably 90 days.
Sir, will you hope, or do you think that maybe when you are in Poland in September, you will make the announcement?
I think it's a very good idea. Thank you very much for giving me that idea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Panie prezydencie,
Mr. President, the visa waiver program appeared on many occasions, but then it did not come into practice. How optimistic are we about the words uttered right now by President Donald Trump? I'm looking at these words optimistic. I'm optimistic about that because I think this is the first U.S. administration which has treated this problem in such a serious way and in such a comprehensive way. So both, when we talk with Mr. President, the President expresses his deep care about that. Also, when I talk with President Mosbacher, the U.S. ambassador to Warsaw, she looks at the problem all the time, and I firmly believe that in accordance with the law binding in the United States, because this is something that I want to stress very strongly, according to the law binding in the United States, by all the actions which are necessary in this respect, such as today's signing of the agreement on preventing and combating serious crimes. I believe that through all these sanctions, this visa waiver program, covering Poles with visa waiver program, is going to be possible soon. Anyway, that it is going to be possible before the end of the first term of President Donald Trump.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we have been listening to President Trump and President Duda of Poland discussing a joint defense declaration they've signed. President Trump says Poland will construct a facility to house 1,000 U.S. troops. Poland will pay for it entirely, and then the U.S. will send the troops. Poland has also agreed to buy more than 30 F-35 planes. Now, all of this is from the Polish perspective, an effort to fend off any ideas of Russian aggression. From the American perspective, however, from President Trump's perspective, he is rewarding Poland for paying its fair share of NATO protection, which is something that the president has been critical of other countries for not doing, namely Germany. He also floated the idea of moving some U.S. troops that are now in Germany over to Poland. That is something they talked about. Now, of course, this is not everything the Polish president wanted. He hoped for a full, active U.S. military base there in Poland. CBS News White House correspondent Weijia Jiang was at the president's news conference and joins us now. Hi, Weijia, can you give us a little more detail into what the two leaders have agreed upon today?
Well, this is certainly exactly what we expected, a new defense deal for these two countries, namely the purchase of 32 F-35 aircraft fighters. In fact, the president took a victory lap, quite literally, even before this press conference, because there was a flyover here at the White House, and we saw one of those aircrafts flying over in a ceremony for the presidents and the first ladies here. They've also agreed to deploy an additional 1,000 U.S. troops to Poland, as you mentioned, Tanya. And what's interesting is the why that was not mentioned, even though it was peripherally, and certainly President Duda mentioned it. President Trump did not clarify the message that he is trying to send to Russia and to Vladimir Putin with this deal. Of course, the reason why this deal exists is because Poland believes that there is additional Russian aggression, not only that threatens their country, but in the region, especially something they've been monitoring since the annexation of Crimea years ago. And of course, the president has had sort of a gray line when it comes to that. In fact, before they met in Helsinki, the president refused to answer whether or not it was part of U.S. policy that Crimea was part of Russia or Ukraine. Anyway, all that to say, the president was again not tough on Russia, not talking about the need to beef up security in the region because of heightened security. The two also talked about entering Poland into the visa waiver program, which would allow people from Poland to travel here without a visa. The president said he'd be making a decision on that front in the next 90 days or so.
It was interesting, Weijia, that he did not come down more harshly on Russia. In fact, he even said, I still hope for a good relationship between Poland and Russia, a good relationship between the U.S. and Russia. But Russia has been increasing its presence in Crimea, has it not?
Exactly. It has been increasing its own military there with weapons as well as troops, and that is why there is concern there about why they're doing that, and that, again, is something that President Trump did not address directly. Now, remember, he will be meeting face-to-face with Putin on the sidelines of the G20 summit at the end of this month, and so we'll be waiting to see what sort of message he delivers after striking this deal with Poland, and of course when it comes to meddling in the U.S. elections. The president also talked about other issues, North Korea, trade encompassing both Mexico and China, and so, you know, there was some news. He said, again, that he is considering a possible meeting with Kim Jong-un. He refused to really say whether he committed that the U.S. would not spy on Korea, as he implied yesterday. He said that's not what he meant, because, again, remember, when he's speaking about North Korea, he knows he's speaking directly to Kim Jong-un, and there is a possibility that those two leaders will meet when the president travels to South Korea later this month as well, after the G20 summit in Japan.
Yeah, and Weijia, he mentioned a letter he received from Kim Jong-un, a lovely letter, as he referred to it, but he would not disclose the contents of that letter.
Yeah, he said he received this, quote, beautiful letter yesterday. It's one of many beautiful letters Kim Jong-un has apparently written to President President Trump, who says we might find out in 2 weeks what it said. We might find out in 100 years what it said. But here's what it probably did not say: how it plans to give up its existing nuclear weapons. That, of course, is the big question that we ask over and over. What is keeping President Trump at the negotiating table if he has not shown evidence that he is actually dismantling those weapons? Today, he repeated again that Kim has kept his promise not to do more nuclear testing, not to do more testing on intercontinental ballistic weapons, again showing good faith in Kim Jong-un ahead of the possibility that they meet in just a couple weeks.
I just want to ask you quickly about one country that also kept coming up when the two leaders were talking, Germany. It seems that President Trump was also eager to send a message to Germany today. And what was that message?
You know, since President Trump took office, even beforehand, he has been very tough on NATO, and specifically on the countries in NATO and how much they spend. And he has been particularly critical of Germany for not contributing the 2% of its GDP. And that's why, again, today he has said that, you know, they need to do more. They need to be paying more. And so when the discussion came up about the possibility of moving troops from Germany to Poland, he was directly asked, do you think that that will be enough to put more pressure on Germany when it comes to defense spending? And he said no. And so he has made it known how he feels about that spending and what steps he might try to take to control it.
All right. Weijia Jiang at the White House, thank you so much for that.
Sure. Thanks, Tanya.
We're going to take a quick break now. You're streaming CBSN. Donald Trump Jr. has finished testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee. This was his second appearance before the panel. His first was in 2017. You will recall the committee subpoenaed Trump Jr. after the release of Robert Mueller's report. After a back and forth, he eventually agreed to come in. Today, Don Jr. said he had nothing to correct from his previous testimony.
The reality, there was nothing to change. If there needed to be clarification because Michael Cohen, who, let's not forget, is serving time right now for lying to these very investigative bodies, I'm happy to do that. I don't think I changed anything of what I said because there was nothing to change. I'm glad that this is finally over. We're able to put some final clarity on that, and I think the committee understands that.
And CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill. Nancy, hi. What was the scope of the questioning Jr. faced today?
Well, Tanya, I can tell you what we assume the scope of the questioning was, but we don't know for sure because it was a closed-door hearing, and we will not get a transcript of what took place. Possibly for months, possibly never. But we understand that the reason that Donald Trump Jr. was asked to come back and testify again after first testifying back in 2017 is because there were some discrepancies in what he had to say about a few key aspects of his family and his business's involvements with Russia, and what other witnesses have said to various committees here on Capitol Hill. And so this committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, run by a Republican, Richard Burr of North Carolina, asked him to come back and testify. And as you mentioned, he didn't really want to do that. There were concerns that perhaps he could get himself in hot water if he changed his answers, or possibly get himself in hot water if he didn't change his answers.
Right.
But he was in that hearing for several hours, and what you played is what he said when he came out. We still haven't heard from the senators about what he said, and frankly, this is a committee that is generally pretty tight-lipped, so we don't know if we'll learn anything from them about what he said.
And Nancy, you mentioned those discrepancies, and of course there were questions as to whether he faced the risk of perjuring himself.
Right.
Was Don Jr. concerned about that?
Well, I asked him that very question as he was walking away from us. Are you worried about perjury charges? And he said he is not. However, what we know from talking to from his team, people from his team, folks in his inner circle, that there was some debate among those who know him about whether he should try to hold out and avoid testifying once again or go ahead and do it. His father, the president, has said repeatedly that he thinks it's very unfair that his son was called back in to testify, that he's a great person and that he doesn't have anything to explain. And as he just repeated in the press availability that he held at the White House just now, he thinks that the entire Mueller investigation was a big nothing burger, as Donald Trump Jr. himself is fond of saying.
All right, meanwhile, switching gears a little bit, Nancy, we know that the White House has invoked executive privilege over materials related to the administration's push to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. The House Oversight Committee wanted those documents from the Justice and Commerce Departments, but it now doesn't appear they will get them. Please remind us why these documents are significant and what happens now.
This is one of the key investigations that the House Oversight Committee has undertaken. This is the committee that basically acts as something of a watchdog over the administration, and the committee chair, Elijah Cummings, and many Democrats are very keen to uncover why exactly the Commerce Department added for a time a question to the upcoming U.S. Census about citizenship. They believe that the Commerce Department was actually acting at the bidding of White House officials who wanted to ask that question for political reasons, and Democrats suspect to make it easier for this particular administration to round up people who might not be citizens of the United States. And so they want to see emails, they want to see documents, they want to see a paper trail, because the Commerce Department has said that actually it was the Justice Department that asked for this question to be added to the census. Democrats don't think that's the case. So they have put out this blanket request for all kinds of documents related to this citizenship question, and they say that they have been stonewalled. And so they were all set to hold both the Secretary of Commerce and the Attorney General in contempt to take a vote today. They have postponed that vote because of this back and forth with the Justice Department. The Justice Department saying, hey, you didn't even give us enough time to negotiate with you over what documents we would give you, which documents we wouldn't. And so the vote has been postponed by a few hours to see if DOJ can really produce anything that would satisfy Democrats. If not, the vote is going to take place later this afternoon.
And Nancy, of course, this is significant because Democrats believe the census question is a political move on the part of the administration, correct?
Right. They believe that this is an administration that had it out for immigrants of all stripes before the president even took office. They say that that was exemplified by some of his comments on the campaign trail. And they believe that he and his close advisors were pushing for this change to the census even before the president officially took office. And that is what they are hoping to find evidence of in these emails, these documents, if they can ever get their hands on them. It's going to be more difficult, of course, now that the Attorney General is saying that the president has exerted executive privilege over yet another large cache of documents.
Nancy, the president also commented on the census issue today, and here's what he said.
Well, I think that, and I'm not overly involved in that, that's really a legal matter, but I think when you have a census and you're not allowed to talk about whether or not somebody's a citizen or not, that doesn't sound so good to me. Can you imagine you send out a census and you're not allowed to say whether or not a person's an American citizen? In Poland, they'd say they're either Polish or they're not, right? So I don't want to get you into this battle, but it's ridiculous. I think it's totally ridiculous that we would have a census without asking. But the Supreme Court is going to be ruling on it soon. I think when a census goes out, you should find out whether or not, and you have the right to ask whether or not somebody is a citizen of the United States.
So, Nancy, ultimately, this is a fight that won't get resolved until the Supreme Court weighs in, which it is set to do shortly, correct?
That's correct. And, you know, no matter what the Supreme Court decides, there is going to be a political debate that remains. Democrats will say that that question in and of itself is an intimidation tactic meant to make even legal immigrants feel somehow threatened, make them feel uncomfortable. And you will have an administration arguing, as the president just did, that the U.S. government has every right to know how many undocumented immigrants are living within its borders. And he says that that is not a strange or unusual question at all.
All right, Nancy Cordes in Washington, we thank you.
You're welcome.
President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden held simultaneous rallies in Iowa yesterday, with both campaigning like it's already 2020. The two traded attacks in what could be a preview of a contentious presidential election should Biden secure the Democratic nominee slot. Here's some of what they had to say about each other.
I believe that the president is literally an existential threat to America.
I'd rather run against, I think, Biden than anybody. I think he's the weakest mentally. Sleepy Joe. He was someplace in Iowa today, and he said my name so many times that people couldn't stand it anymore.
This is a guy who does everything to separate and frighten people.
Joe Biden thought that China was not a competitor of ours. Joe Biden is a dummy.
Iowa farmers have been crushed by his tariff war with China.
And Elena Schneider is a national political reporter at Politico. She joins me from Arlington, Virginia. Elena, welcome. Great to have you with us. So Joe Biden may want to compete against President Trump, but he still has to fend off 23 other Democrats. What is the rationale behind focusing on the president here?
Well, look, I think that both Trump and Biden see this as politically advantageous to them to go ahead and already focus on the general election. For Biden, it's a matter of ignoring those more liberal candidates or those lesser-known candidates that might pull him to the left on a number of issues that he doesn't necessarily want to address or be pointed out to primary voters, that he's maybe not quite as progressive on. And for Trump, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, just in the context for Trump, he already is starting to roll out similar attacks against Biden that he used during 2016, already talking about how Biden is related to crooked Hillary in his words. So I think that he's really trying to use this already as a means to speed ahead and use sort of lines of attack that really worked effectively in 2016 that he hopes again will work in 2020.
So, Elena, President Trump's campaign manager, Brad Parscale, told CBS News that President Trump is fiery this morning over what his campaign believes are unfair polls showing him trailing 6 Democrats nationally. Here's how he addressed those polls at the White House today.
We have great internal polling. They were fake polls that were released by somebody that it's ridiculous. No, we are winning in every single state that we've polled. We're winning in Texas, very big. We're winning in Ohio, very big. We're winning in Florida, very big. They were fake polls that were either put out by the corrupt media, because much of the media in this country, unfortunately, is corrupt. I have to tell you that, Mr. President. And some of it is excellent, but some is very bad. Those are fake numbers. But you know when you're going to see that? You're going to see that on Election Day.
So, Elena, how seriously should the public take these kinds of polls this far out?
Well, look, polling this far out is going to be very fluid. We're going to see it shift and change over the next several months, not only for a general election matchup, but even amongst these primary candidates. Those polls are going to change. But ultimately, polls are a snapshot for where the electorate is in this moment in time. And as much as President Trump would like to dismiss what he's seeing coming out of some of these states, trailing a number of these Democratic presidential candidates already in some key battleground states, that means that he's probably not doing as well in those places. So look, I think that it's a warning for him, and one that he doesn't necessarily publicly would like to acknowledge, but certainly privately is something that they're taking very seriously and that Democrats, in fact, are quite excited about.
All right, meanwhile, there is a clip I'd like to play from Senator Kamala Harris talking about how she would prosecute President Trump if she's elected into the White House. Let's listen.
You have been very clear that you want impeachment proceedings to begin. If you become president, if he was never impeached, would you want the Department of Justice, now that he is no longer a sitting president, to go forward with those obstruction of justice charges?
I believe that they would have no choice and that they should, yes. There has to be accountability. I mean, look, people might, question why I became a prosecutor. Well, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I believe there should be accountability. Everyone should be held accountable, and the president is not above the law.
So President Obama declined to prosecute members of the Bush administration over the Iraq war, even though a lot of Democrats were calling for that. So how big of a break from tradition would this be?
I think it's certainly a break from tradition, but one that Harris is willing and wants to make, in part because this is really red meat news for liberal voters who want to see this president prosecuted in some form. And if it's not going to necessarily come through impeachment proceedings, that they want to see him be held accountable, in the words of Kamala Harris. And so I think that this is a way for her to distinguish herself from the rest of the field, leaning on her own prosecutorial credentials, as she said, and also point out, look, I'm even willing to go further in addressing these concerns around this president than maybe even some of her Democratic primary opponents are willing to say as of yet. So it's just sort of another example of how far she's saying she's willing to go to hold this president accountable.
All right, so we're also getting a new poll from the early primary state of Nevada today. Since the first since March, Joe Biden leads the pack with 36%, and Elizabeth Warren has jumped into second with 19%. Are we seeing her move past Bernie Sanders in the horse race?
Well, look, Nevada is a particularly difficult state to poll, but I do think that these are numbers that her and her team are incredibly excited about, in part because it's showing the momentum that Warren has been able to leapfrog over Bernie Sanders in at least one of these early states. And it's still, as we sort of said at the top of the show, it's still fluid, and these poll numbers are still going to move. But it's a reflection of the energy that she's been able to build out, particularly in the last couple of months, sort of rallying around this idea of she's got a plan, of Warren's got a plan. And that's one that she's really been able to lean into and maybe draw some contrast and difference from Bernie Sanders.
Elena Schneider of Politico, we thank you.
Thank you.
And a quick programming note. Today on Red and Blue, my colleague Elaine Quijano will speak with President Obama's former faith outreach director. He will explain why he thinks former Vice President Joe Biden made a mistake when he reversed his stance on the Hyde Amendment. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on CBSN. Ahead on CBSN, police arrest a second suspect in the shooting of baseball legend David Ortiz. New details on his alleged role in the ambush as investigators still look for a motive. And it was 25 years ago today that two murders would spark the trial of the century. How the O.J. Simpson trial left a lasting impact. You're streaming CBSN. Prosecutors in the Dominican Republic say the attack on Red Sox legend David Ortiz was more sophisticated than they initially thought. In a court document obtained by the Associated Press, witness accounts and security footage detail two additional groups of people in cars at the scene of the shooting. Officials thought just two people were involved in the incident. This comes hours after police made a second arrest in connection with the shooting. The investigation into a motive for the attack is still unclear. CBS News correspondent Mola Lenghi is in Santo Domingo with the latest.
Police have detained at least 5 people for questioning since Sunday's shooting that happened right here at the Dial Bar and Lounge in the entertainment district of Santo Domingo. Ortiz was actually sitting right here on this patio deck of the Dial Bar and Lounge. When the motorcyclist approached, the gunman hopped off, approached Ortiz, and shot him in the back. But police are still investigating whether Ortiz was the intended target of the shooting. Now, the first suspect was transferred to court in Santo Domingo yesterday. Police say Eddie Garcia Garcia was the motorcyclist who brought the shooter to Ortiz. He's charged as an accomplice to an attempted murder. But Garcia's lawyer says he is a fan of Ortiz, and he did not know what he was about to take the shooter to when he picked the shooter up. In Boston, Ortiz took his first steps in the hospital where he is recovering with the help of his family. He underwent a second exploratory surgery there in Boston and will stay in intensive care for at least a few more days to avoid any sort of internal bleeding and other complications. In a statement, Ortiz's wife, Tiffany, said that Ortiz is expected to make a full recovery, that he is resting comfortably, and of course she thanked everyone for the love and support that the family has received.
A California cop has been arrested after he allegedly sent explicit messages to a person he believed was underage. 20-year-old Ethan in San Francisco used the gender-bending Snapchat filter to pose as 16-year-old Esther on a dating app. That's when he matched with 40-year-old Robert Davies. They exchanged messages discussing Esther's age and sexual activities. Ethan turned in screenshots of the conversation to authorities. Davies has been charged with contacting a minor to commit a felony. The young college student says learning that a friend was molested as a child motivated him to seek out predators on the internet. Today marks 25 years since the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, leading to what has been called the trial of the century. O.J. Simpson was accused of killing his ex-wife and her friend, but was acquitted after a 9-month trial that became a national obsession. CBS News' Chris Martinez tells us how the impact of that case remains.
It seems like yesterday.
25 years later, Tanya Brown refuses to allow the memory of her sister to fade.
I miss her greatly this year.
Tanya is the youngest sister of Nicole Brown Simpson and says over the years, Nicole's life and death have inspired women to speak out against domestic violence.
Thank God we're talking about these issues and these causes that months before, years before, we weren't talking about it.
Nicole and her friend Ron Goldman were viciously murdered outside her Brentwood home in June of 1994. What happened next captivated the nation.
This is AC. I have O.J. in the car.
After an infamous freeway police chase, O.J. Simpson was arrested and charged with the killings. His nearly 9-month-long trial, dubbed the trial of the century, became a massive and divisive public spectacle.
Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder,
ending in the former football star's acquittal.
The biggest impact of the O.J. case is all of a sudden the courtroom trials became a spectator sport.
Law professor Lori Levinson served as the trial's legal analyst for CBS News. She believes the case forever changed the public's perception of the legal system.
For a lot of people, this is the first time, if they hadn't sat as a juror, that they actually saw what happened in the courtroom, and much of it bothered them. The issues of race bothered them, the celebrity lawyers bothered them, the theatrics bothered them, and we're still living with some of that effect.
While O.J. Simpson was found liable for the deaths in a civil court case, no one was ever convicted criminally for Nicole and Ron's murders. Their killings today still officially listed as unsolved. Chris Martinez, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And still to come, violent clashes break out in Hong Kong over a controversial law, and more protests are expected. We have a correspondent on the ground. Plus, it's been 3 years since the deadly Pulse nightclub shooting, and tributes are pouring in. Hear how one 2020 candidate is remembering the tragedy next. This is CBSN, always on. Today marks 3 years since the deadly Pulse nightclub shooting. A gunman opened fire on the gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida in 2016. He killed 49 people and wounded another 53. It is the deadliest attack against the LGBTQ community in U.S. history. Tributes are pouring in, and here's what 2020 presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke said about the shooting at a Pride run in New York City earlier today.
Today is the 3rd anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida. And I want to make sure part of the way that we commemorate those victims and acknowledge the hatred and the homophobia that still exists in this country is to take decisive action to protect the full rights of every single one of our fellow Americans.
A temporary memorial sits outside the since-closed club. Earlier this week, Florida Representative Darren Soto and Stephanie Murphy introduced legislation that would mark the Pulse nightclub as a national memorial. President Trump was in Iowa yesterday to speak at a renewable energy event. While there, he pitched farmers on his tariff policies against China.
We're reversing decades of failed trade policies, opening up new markets and fighting to give our farmers the fair and level playing field they deserve. Within a year and a half, I would say you'll be in the best position that you've been in 15 years.
But many U.S. farmers are struggling because of those trade disputes, as well as record rainfalls in recent weeks. CBS News national correspondent Dean Reynolds spoke to one suffering farmer in Manhattan, Illinois.
12. Bingo.
Meet Dave Kestel. Yesterday, we watched as he planted the last of his corn crop on the 1,000 acres he farms and just started planting his soybeans, both about 6 weeks delayed from his target date. His farm, like so many others, had been waterlogged by record rainfall.
We fought rain and Mother Nature all the time. I mean, Mother Nature's the boss.
Last month, the U.S. suffered its second rainiest month on record, much of it occurring in Midwestern states like Illinois and Iowa, all at the height of planting season. That rain,
he's basically dead already,
and subsequent hardening of the soil on sunny days has stunted his corn crop.
You need almost perfect conditions now to make a go of it.
I would
this
say
year.
we need picture-perfect conditions to even get 2/3 of a yield.
And what do you think the odds of having a perfect balance between sun and rain?
Let's just go to Vegas instead. I think your odds are better.
The rough weather and ongoing trade war with China moved the Trump administration last month to offer farmers $16 billion to help them and help him retain their allegiance in 2020. Like most farmers, Kestel does not welcome tariffs, but believes they are a way the president is applying leverage to make trade more fair.
Do you sometimes feel like a pawn in the chess game here that's being played?
Yes and no. I believe in President Trump. He seems harsh right now, but he's a businessman, and he's trying to make this fair trade.
Violence broke out in Hong Kong today as police clashed with protesters. Authorities used tear gas on the demonstrators, who responded by throwing bricks and bottles. The protests started because Hong Kong's government is considering legislation that would allow people to be extradited to mainland China. The bill would even apply to foreigners living in Hong Kong. CBS News Asia correspondent Ramy Inocencio was at the protests and has more.
Police fired tear gas and rubber bullets to push angry protesters back as they tried to storm Hong Kong's central government offices to stop debate on a contentious extradition bill. If the legislation passes, it would allow criminal suspects, even tourists, to be sent to mainland China for trial.
If I'm an American and I did something bad here, I could potentially be extradited to China.
Well, you don't even have to do anything bad. What is to stop China from making up evidence?
A lot of people who we spoke to here, opposition lawmakers as well as people here on the streets, have said that they really don't trust the Chinese legal system because people have been disappeared. They've been taken away, that there's no due process, that there's no fair trial there.
Opponents say the bill is part of Beijing's push for greater integration with the mainland and violates Hong Kong's separate status. Protesters say they won't stop standing up for their rights.
I still believe in people's power. As long as we're peaceful and as long as we're massive,
there's a chance that the people will win.
Wednesday's demonstrations did manage to keep the legislature from considering the controversial bill, but it's a short-term win since Hong Kong's leader vows the bill will be passed no matter what. Ramy Inocencio, CBS News, Hong Kong.
Russian police have detained more than 400 people today, including opposition leader Alexei Navalny, during a protest in Moscow. Demonstrators were calling for police officers to be punished after the alleged framing of a journalist. Police abruptly dropped charges against Ivan Golunov yesterday following earlier protests. He's known for exposing corruption against Moscow city officials. But the journalist was detained last week and accused of dealing drugs, an allegation he denied. Witnesses said more than 1,000 people marched in the streets today. 10 candidates are running to become the next British Prime Minister. All have political experience, but it turns out many also have experience with drugs. Here's Simon Bates for this week's London Calling.
Straight question. Could you vote for anyone running for office who at the beginning of the campaign fessed up to using cocaine? Not once, but on several occasions 20 years ago. This is Michael Gove, a top minister in the British government. He's one of the leading candidates to be our next Prime Minister now that Theresa May has resigned. But his chances have taken a hit after his shock admission to cocaine use, made much worse by the fact that he wrote a newspaper article condemning the drug at the same time as hosting a party where guests recalled it was available. Hypocrisy? You judge. Mr. Gove came clean, but now the spotlight has fallen on the other candidates as one by one they were asked if they'd ever taken drugs. The favourite, former Mayor of London Boris Johnson, has already stated that he was once given cocaine, but he sneezed and it never went up his nose. Eat your heart out, Bill Clinton. Our Foreign Secretary thinks he once had a yogurt drink laced with cannabis many years ago when he was backpacking through India. This chap says he tried cannabis at university, and so did she.